to our Provo Municipal Council meeting tonight. It is Tuesday, January 5th, and it is 5:35 p.m. This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means. On December 10th, 2020, in accordance with Utah's Open and Public Meetings Act, I have determined that conducting meetings of the Municipal Council within anchor locations, such as the Municipal Council Chamber, presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. These are the facts upon which I have made this determination. The World Health Organization has classified novel coronavirus, aka COVID-19, as a pandemic. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention state that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. And Utah is currently subject to Utah Public Health Order 2020-26, which limits the size of public gatherings and which requires people to wear face coverings and follow social distancing guidelines. Utah County is currently listed as having a high level of coronavirus transmission. And finally, physical distancing measures will be difficult to set up and maintain in the Provo City Municipal Council chamber and other meeting rooms. Additionally, the chair of the governing board of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo City, David Sewell, has determined that its meetings are subject to the same risks and has adopted the same procedures as the Municipal Council. The meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing at youtube.com/Provo City Council. The council requests that attendees help maintain the decorum of the meeting by silencing electronic devices and being respectful to others, and to please wait to speak until called on by the council chair. In the current situation, where the meeting is being held via Zoom webinar and broadcast over YouTube, I remind you to turn off your mics when not speaking, so as to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. I will state the roll call here of our attendees. I am George Handley, Chair, joined by Vice Chair David Harding and fellow council members Travis Hoban, Dave Shipley, Shannon Ellsworth, Bill Fillmore, and Dave Sewell. We're also joined by Mayor Michelle Kafusi, Wayne Parker, Chief Administrative Officer, and Cliff Strachan, Executive Director of the Council, and Brian Jones, our Council Attorney. We have other staff also attending and assisting here with this meeting. We will begin with an opening prayer that will be given by Linda P. Walton. We're grateful to have her here, and after her prayer, we'll have a Pledge of Allegiance provided by Mr. Bill Fillmore. And I don't know if Ms. Walton can be unmuted. There we go. Oh, let's see. It just muted you back again. I don't know why. Are you there? We're not hearing you, and it's still, there we go.
Let's try that.
Yes, that works. Excellent.
A lot of people wish it was that easy to mute me, so thank you very much. I would like to quickly read from Romans 12 because it's been kind of a tough time for everyone. So, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. That's what we're going to do tonight. So let's pray together. Our dear Father, we are so grateful to have a free country where we can get together and make decisions that will benefit our community. And Father, I pray that you will reach out to everyone involved in this meeting and to every resident in this community, that we can all work together to make this the best place possible on the planet. And Father, we pray for our sister communities, whether it's the county or the other cities or the state or even the nation, with all of the challenges that we have, Father. And we pray that your Spirit will be with us, that you will give us wisdom, that you will help us realize that we love each other more than anything, even if we believe differently, and that you have given us that gift. And so tonight, Father, again, we pray that you'll be with everyone on the council and those that are helping to provide other information so that the best decisions possible can be made. And Father, we pray in Jesus' name, amen.
And
Amen.
go ahead, Mr. Fillmore.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Walton and Mr. Fillmore. It's good to have such a wonderful beginning to our meeting. And as we begin tonight's meeting, we join with our dear Provo Police Department in remembering Master Officer Joseph Shinners. His life was lost in the line of duty 2 years ago today. He will always be remembered as a man of honor and integrity, representing what the Provo Police Department stands for. May we keep the Shinners family and our law enforcement in our thoughts today is our hope as a council. I'd like to turn the time over to the mayor, who would like to share a few words about the topping off ceremony for the new city center building.
Thank you, Chair Hanley. It's an exciting time, and I can't think of a better day to do this on the anniversary of Officer Shinners' passing to do the topping off ceremony on the police officer's new public safety building. I've got a few slides here, so I'll kind of just talk through a few things. First of all, there were 3,400 pieces of steel placed on this new building. This was the very last piece. And for those of you that don't know what a topping off ceremony is, it goes back to ancient Europe. The tree or leafy branch on the beam represents the natural resources needed to construct the building. The new Provo City Hall building will be energy efficient to the highest level, thus showing this respect for the environment. The attached American flag represents the pride of country in both workmanship with this beautiful and dynamic building, as well as our skilled construction team and the existing showcasing their trade talents. And then you can't really see, but everyone in the whole city that works in the city offices were invited from 8 to 11 this morning to go out and sign this beam. And we had markers out there, and the signatures and notes on the beam personalize the connection and pride our Provo City team always feels for this new city hall. This will be their home away from home. John, why don't you go through to the next pictures? I've got a few pictures to show. We had to be really COVID aware, so it wasn't as big as it normally would be, but we wanted to make sure you were all a part of this. Okay, you can go to the next one. There's our flag being put up. Okay, and this one is a video. Yeah, if you want to start the video, it just kind of shows it starting to rise up. And it's the last beam of the steel to go up. There it is up there really high now. And then we served all the construction workers box lunches and drinks for all their hard work. And they were so gracious and kind. I can't tell you how many thanked us for employing them during this COVID and pandemic time. I had many stories whispered to me about how grateful they were to have a job, especially over the Christmas holidays, why family members were being laid off. They were able to keep working and keep taking care of their families. And there's the team. It's really exciting, and it's a public safety building more than anything, and the first responders, our police and fire, are so deserving of this new facility. Does anybody have any questions?
Hey.
Well, thank you, Mayor. That's wonderful. We express our appreciation to you and your team and all those who've worked so hard to get us to this point. That's pretty exciting that we're getting this close from just having it as a thought in our minds a long time ago. So wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Mayor. We'll move on then to our public comment. Mr. Strachan, would you please provide some instructions about that?
Certainly. There are three types of items for which public comment will be received. The first is the open public comment period. The council will allow up to 15 minutes for public comments on matters that do not appear on tonight's agenda. The second is for items that require a public hearing. For those items, time will be provided for all those who wish to speak. The third is for items on the agenda that do not require a public hearing. The council will allow up to 15 minutes for comments on each item. Because the City Council is meeting virtually using Zoom webinar, and this meeting is being broadcast on the Provo City Council's YouTube channel, we have enabled telephone access to receive public comment, the numbers for which will be shown on the screen during the meeting. Callers may have to try multiple numbers to get connected. When a caller is connected, they will be required to enter the meeting ID and enter the pound symbol. When asked for a personal ID number, just enter pound. The caller will now enter the meeting as an attendee and will be able to hear the meeting while muted. If a caller wishes to speak on the item being discussed, they can press *9 to indicate their desire to comment and then wait to be called upon. When called upon, press *6 to unmute yourself. Callers will be called upon by the last 4 digits of the listed phone number. Please provide your name and city of residence before making your comments. Each caller will be given up to 2 minutes to speak. A timer will be posted on screen and a beep should be audible to the caller when their time is up. A reminder that there is a lag of approximately 30 to 60 seconds between the meeting and the broadcast. To avoid confusion, callers should mute the broadcast to hear the discussion in real time over the phone. The open public comment period starts now.
Thank you, Mr. Strachan. So I currently do not see anybody having called in, but we'll just wait a moment. All right, seeing no public comment, we'll bring it back to the council for the approval of minutes. It is proposed we approve the following minutes: July 21st, 2020 council meeting, December 1st, 2020 council meeting. Are there any objections or requested changes? Okay, seeing no requests for changes or objections, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Mr. Strachan has something he wants to say before item number 1.
All right, we'll just pull this up. Council members and members of the public, normally at this point of the night, when we're in the council chamber, it's my privilege as the council executive director to thank the outgoing chair and vice chair of the council's leadership team and to award them a plaque or some gift. This year, the chairs have selected a clock, and we want to thank Mr. Hanley and Mr. Harding for their dedicated service this last year. It's been a tough year, and you both have handled the leadership of this council with great dignity and considerable skill. And we thank you for your effort. And I would love to be able to shake your hand and give this to you in person, but I will make sure you get the clock later. And thank you again on behalf of the staff, the council, and I'm sure the residents of this city. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Cliff. I want to thank Dave Harding in particular for his help this last year, because I was new to leadership entirely, and behind the scenes he gave me a lot of help and provided a lot of wisdom So I'm very appreciative of that, and also just the amazing staff that you, Cliff, and all the others in our office. You guys are just tremendous and provide such assistance that I think you make it a lot easier than it could be. So I feel very appreciative. Thank you very much. Okay, we will. So we'll turn then to our action agenda, which is an implied motion on the election of municipal council officers for chair and vice chair. And this time I would call for nominations for the chair. And I would like to have the honor to nominate Dave Sewell to be our chair for 2021. Do we have any other nominations for chair?
I would move to close the nominations.
I don't know if that's a legitimate motion or not. We can, if there are no other nominations, let's vote then. I'll begin.
Do we need a second?
Do we?
No, you don't.
I don't think we do. Yeah, it's just.
No, this process. Sorry, I was trying to find my buttons on here, but this process is governed by city ordinance, so it's not. So it's separate from normal rules of procedure, and the procedure asks for a call for nominations. If there are multiple nominations, each person nominated is voted for in order, and as soon as someone receives 4 votes, that person is elected chair. And as indicated in city code, there's to be no discussion on the nominations, but merely a vote on each person nominated.
So seeing no further nominations, then I will call for a vote on Dave Sewell as chair. I will vote yes. Mr. Harding?
I will enthusiastically vote yes.
Ms. Ellsworth?
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore?
Here, here. Yes.
I'll one up Dave Hardy and I'll say heck yes.
Mr. Sewell?
Yes, and thank you.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So Dave Sewell is the unanimous selection as chair for 2021. I will repeat this process then for vice chair and call for a nomination for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate. Go ahead, Mr. Fillmore.
I was going to nominate David Shipley.
All right. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Has a silencing effect. All right. So seeing no other nominations for vice chair, I'll call for a vote. I'll start with you, Mr. Harding.
Another enthusiastic yes.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore.
Yes, indeed.
Mr. Hoban.
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes, and thank you.
And Mr. Shipley.
Yes, and thank you.
And I will also vote yes, enthusiastically for both. Okay, so that was unanimous. So we have 2 candidates then who have been nominated and ratified for chair and vice chair. So now we have an implied motion on a resolution acknowledging the election of Dave Sewell as chair and Dave Shipley as vice chair of the Provo Municipal Council for calendar year 2021. So if there is any desired discussion of this item, so speak at this time. Otherwise, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. I will begin with Ms. Ellsworth.
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore.
Yes.
Mr. Hoban.
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes.
Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
I will vote yes. Mr. Harding.
Yes.
Okay, that voting is unanimous. In normal, under normal circumstances, we would have a little bit of musical chairs and we would move seats. But I will simply turn the meeting over to Chair Sewell. Thank you so much, both of you, for your willingness to do this, and we will support you wholeheartedly in your efforts.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say I really appreciate the leadership team we've had this year with you, Chair Hanley, and Vice Chair Harding. I think you've done a wonderful job and appreciate it very much. I just learned before the meeting that there are some nuances to how we handle public input under this situation, kind of controlling the things behind the scenes. And since I've not been trained on that, I was wondering, Mr. Hanley, if you would be willing to go ahead and chair this next item, since you're very up to speed with how that works.
I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. So we have a resolution. This is an implied motion, still part of our action agenda, on a resolution of intent for the creation of the Slate Canyon Drive parking permit area. And Javin Weaver, city planner, will present. Let's see, is Mr. Weaver with us? There you still.
There we go. John, if you can go to my next slide, please. So thank you. So we're going to go over a few things. We're going to go over the applicant's proposal, some facts, and then go over staff's recommendation. And then if you have any questions for staff. Next slide, please. So Hannah Peterson was the applicant of the proposal, and initially in that proposal, it was for the entire corridor. You can see on the screen the yellow line. It goes from State Street on the southern end. On the north end, it ends at about 350 east, 300 south. The proposal was to have unrestricted time. You would be able to park on the street unrestricted between the hours of 6 a.m. until 1 a.m. And then between the hours of 1 a.m. and 6 a.m., there would be restrictions to park on the street. Number of permits would be given based on the street frontage. RVs and vehicles that are stationary on the roadway have been an issue. Some of the goals from the applicant were to reduce parking congestion and reduce the need for zoning enforcement. When staff analyzed the corridor, we analyzed, in addition to the parked vehicles, we also analyzed where people would travel to when they were parked on the street, whether it was to within the HOA or if they would depart their car and go to a residence along Slate Canyon Drive. Next slide, please. So staff analyzed the area, and we saw that there are 179 legal parking spaces. These legal parking spaces come from about 690 South to 14th South, as you can see on screen. No section was 100% occupied in any area at any given time. Staff analyzed where an individual, during the analysis, staff saw the need to add no parking signs by intersections and fire hydrants to increase the safety within this area. If speeding was occurring, then that's due to the design and lack of enforcement. Vehicles are only occupying the street at 51% on average. This was based on a 24 hours average. Staff saw that there are 101 single-family dwellings along this corridor. 17 dwellings have an active renter dwelling license. 4 dwellings have an active code enforcement case to obtain a renter dwelling license. 6 dwellings have an active code enforcement case for occupancy. Between the years of 1997 and 2019, we've had 266 cases, code enforcement cases. 95 of those were for occupancy, 20 or for not having an RDL. And looking at the map on the right side, I've broken it up into a few different sections. That's how I kind of broke it up when I was analyzing it. Between the 690 South and Aspen Loop, on average, there were about, during the 24 average, it was about 32% average of vehicles occupying the street. At nighttime, it was the highest at about 78%. Between Aspen Loop and 1080 South, on average, we had 60% of vehicles parking there all the time. 92% of that was at midnight. 1080 South to Nevada Avenue, 73% on the average, with 71% at midnight. And from Nevada to 14th South, saw 43% average with 86% midnight. The $15 cost of the proposed permit does not cover the cost to administer and enforce the applicant's proposal. Next slide. The data that was collected illustrates there's still plenty of on-street parking along the corridor. Staff does not believe that the applicant's proposal will accomplish what is their desired outcome. Staff believes that this staff's recommendation will accomplish many of the goals that the applicant actually had. Staff recommends not to adopt the Slate Canyon Drive permit proposal. Staff does recommend that a 2-hour parking restriction be installed and implemented along Slate Canyon from the hours of 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. from about Slate Canyon Park Street, which is the turnoff up to the park, down to about 1450 South. Staff recommends a less intrusive approach to accomplishing the goals that the applicant had, rather than initially imposing a permit program along the corridor. Staff recommends, but with this recommendation, this will encourage the use of off-street parking and garages while increasing safety when backing out of driveways with the reduction of vehicles being parked on the street. This will encourage each unit along the corridor to use the allotted 4 off-street parking spaces that they each have. The certificate of occupancies that each dwelling unit has does say that each unit should limit the number of vehicles. However, this is really hard to enforce. If a dwelling is being rented out to the legal occupancy of 3 singles, then each vehicle could be parked off-street at the dwelling. If an individual lives along this corridor and they would be able to park their vehicle overnight on the street, they could come home from work and then leave or work a 9-to-5 job and still be able to park their vehicle on the street if they desire, or they can park it on their own property. The 2-hour restriction is to encourage vehicles to be parked off street and to encourage the structures, or encourage their homes to be used for, garages to be used for what the intended purpose was, and to eliminate stationary vehicles along Slate Canyon Drive. Staff recommends to start with this approach, analyze this, come back at a later date, and make further modifications at a time as time progresses without amending a potential permit program ordinance text. This could be, like an example could be just extending the time restriction as staff's proposing. It could be a little bit longer, it could be less, but further analysis would deem necessary. Are there any questions for staff?
Let me just say to the public, if you wish to make a public comment on this item, we are going to open this up for public comment here very, very shortly. So now would be a good time to call. We're just going to ask a couple of questions of Mr. Weaver before doing that. So Mr. Fillmore. You're muted, Mr. Fillmore.
Please. Mr. Weaver, my primary concern is safety along the Slate Canyon Drive. What is the current speed limit there?
Current speed limit is 25 miles an hour.
Okay. I have to tell you, I've driven that street many times to visit my son's family. I don't know that I've ever noticed anybody driving 25 miles per hour. Is there a difficulty in enforcing that speed limit in that neighborhood?
I'm unaware if there is, but I would have to contact the police department to inquire about that.
Have we considered speed bumps, given the fact that it's a residential street, the 25-mile-per-hour speed limit that's being violated?
Public Works is analyzing the street, and they are working on coming up with some solutions. And when I talked with them today, they recommended that we could discuss some of these solutions at a work session at a later time for the corridor.
There is an existing ordinance in place that limits cars on the street continuously beyond 72 hours. Is that right?
If a vehicle is parked on the street longer than 72 hours, then they may receive a citation from parking enforcement. The vehicles do need to be moving every 72 hours.
Okay, is that assiduously enforced?
As far as I know, yes.
Really? Because I understand that's one of the main complaints from citizens in that area, that the existing is not enforced.
And part of that is complaint based on a vehicle. If there's a specific vehicle parked in front of a home, that they will go out and then mark it. But I can also pass on to parking enforcement to patrol this corridor more fervently.
Okay, well, thank you for answering my questions.
Mr. Hoban.
Hey, thanks. Javin, thank you for the presentation. We got a lot of emails and they referenced proposal 1, 2, and 3. Are there some other proposals that we can review quickly just as an overview, high level overview?
Can I answer that question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that all the citizens on Slate Canyon knew about this. So what I did is I took the staff report and summarized the proposal that came from a citizen and called that option 1. Then I summarized the staff's recommendation, called that option 2. And then I said another alternative is to increase enforcement, and that was called option 3. So I apologize for the confusion. I was just trying to condense that report and leave flyers on every single door at Slate Canyon Drive.
Okay, well, maybe we can hear some of those ideas during the discussion portion.
Okay.
Sorry, what ideas?
Your summary, I guess.
No, I just summarized the report we already have. What Javin just said, basically.
Okay.
All right. If there are no other questions for Mr. Weaver, we'll open it up for public comment. And now would be a time to call in. So because of delay, we'll give it a moment, a break here for the time for people to call in. Just a question for staff. Do we need to, we've waited a minute here. Are we okay to continue?
Traditionally, we waited the full minute. Right now, it looks like there's only 4 people watching on YouTube or on Facebook and 16 on YouTube.
Question for staff. Do we need to, waited a minute here. Are we okay to continue? That was weird. Just, I guess somebody was listening to the YouTube or the delayed broadcast there. Did you finish what you were going to say, Mr. Strachan?
I did, and that was my fault. I had it up trying to find out how many people were watching.
Okay. All right. So we'll bring it back to council for discussion. I had a question for Mr. Weaver. some comments that I read. Well, I have sort of two questions. One is, it's COVID time, it's a pandemic, people are spending an inordinate amount of time at home, working at home. So I sense that the time to, if we were to implement something like this, that the staff is recommending, where we sort of have some measure of, its success, it seems like this is the wrong time to do that. Because we wouldn't get any sort of reliable information under these circumstances. So I'd like your thoughts on that. And the second question is, some of the comments were saying that, a 2-hour limit from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., if that's going to improve safety, it's not really relevant. I guess maybe they were referring to normal circumstances when lots of people are pulling out of their driveways between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. When this would not be in effect. So I'm interested in your responses to those two issues.
If I can ask clarity on what you mean by reliable information first, please.
Well, I just mean that if we're going to see what the impact of this program might be on the neighborhood, but the neighborhood's driving and parking patterns are so wildly different than they will be, hopefully in a few months' time when restrictions are ended and people are more likely to be going back to work. I'm just wondering if now's the best time to measure the impact of such an ordinance and maybe waiting until the pandemic is over to get better information.
I think now is still a good time to do this. And to answer with the reasons I'm recommending 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. is, and still to be able to encourage people to enjoy where they live at their home. I don't want somebody to have to wake up early, move their car, then go and get ready for the day, and then leave to go to work. And by having the 9 a.m. start time allows for the easier, I'm going to say livability at the home before you go to work. Again, this could be tweaked. By implementing a time restriction rather than a permit does allow us to have a lot of flex room rather than coming back to council for this, and to really see if that's the right time or if we do need to make some tweaks at a later moment.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt our discussion because it sounds like there may have been some technical difficulties with people getting online to make public comments. So I do have 3 callers who would like to speak. So if you would like to speak, press *9. There we go. Okay, so caller 1555, go ahead. You'll need to press *6 to unmute yourself. Hello? Looks like you're unmuted. Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
I had my phone muted too. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Lisa Knapp. I live at 1125 South Slate Canyon Drive. I've been there for over almost 25 years. I raised my family there, and I am vehemently opposed to a parking permit program or a parking time limits. When my children were home, we typically had a car in the garage, a car in the driveway, and at least one car sometimes parked directly in front of our house.
Hello? Seems like you got muted somehow. It says she's unmuted. Any ideas, folks? I don't know what to do.
Maybe just pause her. I think she's clear that she's opposed to it, and see if she raises her hand again. Move on to the next.
Okay, I apologize. We're gonna, she dropped off. If she wants to call back, she can, and I'll give her a chance to finish anything else she might want to say. So we'll go with Hannah Peterson. Go ahead. You'll need to press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, so difficult. Thank you for your time. It's going to be difficult to give some of you who did not hear our original presentation a recap in 2 minutes, but I'll try and be brief. We worked with Matt Taylor, who was the parking representative, and who attended our meetings and who walked us through this. We also met with Gary McGinn. The parking permit proposal 1, or the original plan, was directed by staff on what we should do. The parking permit fee, $15, everything how it was crafted, we followed the direction of Matt Taylor. I'm concerned that a decision will be made when you haven't had a chance to hear the proposal, and also a staff recommendation made by Javin Weaver, who I'm grateful for your efforts, but has never really met with us or never attended any of the meetings to get kind of the background and the nuances. We did do everything that staff asked us. This parking proposal was recommended to us by Gary McGinn, that our neighborhood go through this. You had hundreds of residents involved. We put flyers and knocked on doors at least twice in all of Provost and Slate Canyon Drive. We have all of the data, all of the comment cards and everything. We had a 70% approval for Slate Canyon Drive. We also, our main goal was zoning issues, which is why Gary McGinn asked us to do this rather than zoning enforcement. Because you can see that there's only 17 legal rental dwelling licenses. Well, we know there's at least 400 illegal rentals in our neighborhood that we would love to have a chance to show you. That's our main concern, is how do we address this in a less costly effort that can encourage affordable housing and can be a compromise. That's the heart of it that I don't think that we're really having a chance to discuss. So I guess what my request is to consider the costs of not passing this. And I just don't think you have maybe enough information to do that right now. I would hope that you could give us an opportunity to present the presentation and to present the information to the new council and to the new parking staff. And we can really look at it and say, wait a second, what are some of the negative costs that can come from not doing it? I mean, are you really going to enforce zoning on all these units? You know, are you going to set a precedence where you're not going to? I just wish we had some actual time where you could see all of the information from the neighborhood. That's all I'll say. I know I went past my time.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. We also did receive your email earlier, so we did get a fuller story behind it. So thank you very much. Okay, we'll go to caller caller 8724. You'll want to again press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. My name's Cody Cutler. Thank you for doing this and for hearing us out. I've lived in Provo for 5 years. 4 of those years were spent on Slate Canyon. I just barely moved down to the Pioneer Development. But I love Slate Canyon Drive. It's a great place to live. And I don't feel like the parking permit is necessary or any type of further parking kind of restriction or enforcement on Slate Canyon Drive. And all the time that I lived there, 4 years, which I know is not as much as some other people, but in the 4 years I lived there, I never, ever really had a problem parking in front of my own house or parking across the street from my house, if that was the case. The only two times I can recall having an issue were if a neighbor was having a party, which, happens occasionally, and we all have parties, and, we all, support that. And the other was when the city put up the no parking signs, which did eliminate my ability to park either across the street or next to my house, which was a bit frustrating, but that's a topic for another time. So for that reason, just as my personal experience, it just kind of seems not needed and just a little ridiculous, if I'm being honest. Furthermore, I am a young single adult. I'm a renter. And the Slate Canyon, that kind of area, Canyon Meadows, is my stomping grounds, the people I hang out with. And if I'm being honest, I don't know anyone doing the over occupancy thing anymore, and I'm pretty well connected up there. And that's not saying there couldn't be. I'm not connected to everyone. I just kind of feel like that might have been more or less resolved kind of with that great purge of 2017, when that new ordinance was passed. So just coming from my perspective as someone who lived on Slate Canyon Drive and is pretty well connected to renters in South Provo, I just don't see a real need for this. It just seems like a veiled attempt to kind of bully renters and cause problems for them. So yeah, that's my honest opinion, and I thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you. All right, caller 1555, you're back again. Sorry about whatever technical difficulty there was. You just again press *6. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, my phone's been dropping calls. Sorry. Anyway, I think it is unfair. I think it is unneeded, as the previous person mentioned. I think that it makes it extremely difficult for families with teenage children. It's super inconvenient. I was mentioning that my son and his wife came down. They were visiting, ended up staying overnight, and I can't even imagine the hassle it would have been to try and find a permit and change the permit and all this stuff just to have somebody stay overnight who belongs at my home. If we need to enforce zoning, let's enforce zoning. Let's not get punishing and punitive to people who are living here with their families, with their legal number of occupancy roommates. It's unnecessary, in my opinion. And we did have a meeting a couple years ago, probably at Spring Creek, with the people on the south end of Slate Canyon in the Provo South neighborhood. And it was, from what I understood, it was overwhelmingly opposed to parking permits. And one of the neighborhood vice chairs at that time, Candace Gazdick, told me, yeah, I think this issue is dead. And so I was shocked when all of a sudden I got a note on my door yesterday saying that it's back. And I love living in Provo. I love living on Slate Canyon. I've been here, as I said, almost 25 years. But honestly, if this parking permit thing goes through, it's going to mess my life up so much, I will seriously consider selling my house and moving out of Provo. So that's my 2 cents. I say, don't do it. Get some more input, and let's see where we go with that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, there's one more caller, but no hand raised. So give a moment. If you want to speak, you'll need to press *9 so we can see your hand raised. We appreciate everyone's patience and understanding with the technological challenges. Okay, caller 3306. Go ahead. Press *6 to unmute yourself.
Great.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Excellent. Yeah, my wife and I are on speaker. We live on Slate Canyon. Just a couple of thoughts. I really like Lisa's.
Sorry, could you state your name?
Oh, my name is Tyrell Fife. I live at 1212 South Slate Canyon Drive.
Thank you.
I think I've read some of the material and so on, and I think at the heart of this, it's the renter issue and the overpopulation of cars and so on. And I don't know that this would really solve that. I think if people are investing in property and so on, buying a home there and then just having people rent it out. They're not the ones dealing with the parking. The renters would be. I don't know that it would deter people from renting or really fix that problem. And so I don't know if that's something we could look at and so on. I also, we've been in here since May of 2019, and this is the first that we'd heard of it. We're very active. We obviously live there and just got that flyer. So I don't know if that's other people's experiences as well, but it just seemed a little quick to get a flyer on a door on a Sunday. And we really appreciate the flyer, and then potentially have some, ordinance passed on the Tuesday following. That just seemed rather quick. So, and maybe we moved in after, so my wife mentioned. So we're definitely opposed to it. The parking is rough sometimes, but I feel like if we had some good, enforcement of those cars that are there for days on end, trailers sometimes, stuff like that, it would definitely be a better solution. So that's all from us.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, did you want to make a comment? I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to, and really I think probably the last comment was a perfect segue into what I wanted to say, which was to explain a little bit the procedural step that we're in here. The permit parking program process is quite a lengthy one with several steps. And I'd have to look at the dates, but I think this started back in October or earlier. The dates are in the resolution. I don't have it open in front of me, but the first step in the process is for citizens to submit a petition asking for a permit parking program to be implemented. And Hannah Peterson, as she mentioned in her phone call, did that several months ago, actually. And then the next step in the process is the council receives that petition and they hold a public hearing or a public meeting to assess public interest in whether they want to even look at this anymore or not. The council held that public meeting in a work session and forwarded the proposal on to the parking permit or the city's parking coordinator. And I believe Javin is now filling that role. And for a report, for several things to be studied and reported back on. That report happened a couple of months ago. And then the council is by ordinance supposed to, within 90 days, hold a public hearing on a resolution of intent to create a parking permit program. That's actually the step that we're at today. So even if the council affirmatively voted for the implied motion, it would not create a permit parking program today. What would happen is the council would approve a resolution that says, we intend to hold another public hearing within 90 days to consider the formal adoption of the parking permit program. If tonight's implied motion passes, then notice would be delivered to all of the affected persons of that hearing that's going to happen later. And at that hearing, the council would actually vote on an ordinance. So tonight you're deciding kind of whether to move forward or not. An affirmative vote means that notice will be sent of the future public hearing. That public hearing will be scheduled and an ordinance would be considered at that public hearing. A negative vote, well, obviously continuance is also an option to gather more information if you want. A negative vote against the implied motion means that at this point the parking permit program process for this particular program is over, but that doesn't prevent city administration from taking other parking mitigation procedures or actions such as those proposed by Javin, as far as putting in the 2-hour parking limit and doing some other things there which don't actually require an ordinance to accomplish. So are there any questions about that? I just wanted to give some background about where you're at.
Very helpful, Mr. Jones. Appreciate it. I see more callers, but I don't see hands raised. Mr. Weaver, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, just to clarify, the data that was collected was primarily done pre-COVID. It was going to be in the fall of 2019. So the numbers should be more realistic on a normal basis.
Okay. All right. Seeing no other hands, then Mr. Strachan, did you have a comment?
Yes, I merely wanted to advise that this is one of 3 parking permit program applications that you're going to be considering. You may recall back in November, early December, we had talked about some, and then we put them on a 90-day cycle. So those other 2 will be coming in future weeks. It'll be at the very same step as we're doing tonight.
Okay. All right. We'll bring it back to council for discussion. I'm sorry, I see another hand. I'm just a little nervous about the technology slowing things down. So from the public, caller 1365, go ahead. You there? Caller 1635, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Sorry. So my name's Elizabeth, and I have lived here for 9 years, and I am single. I do rent. And
I'm sorry, can you state your full name, please?
Sorry, Elizabeth Woodall.
Thank you.
And I love being in a neighborhood that has lots of families and has, diverse people. I'm not a transient college student. I am much closer to 40 than I am to 30, and I plan on being here for a long while. I want to put down roots, and I've lived in some really big cities like San Diego and DC growing up, and frankly, parking here feels wonderful compared to other places I've lived. And I came in a few minutes late, but some of the statistics a gentleman was sharing at the beginning was saying the percentage of parking spots that were being utilized during the day and at midnight. And I recall the highest number I think he said was 92%, and that was at midnight for a section of Slate Canyon Road. So it doesn't sound like we're actually hitting 100% capacity all the time. I think we just have a lot of inconveniences, and I get it. And we do have boats and trailers. My own neighbor has a truck of his own and a work truck, and his wife has a vehicle. And we just have a lot of vehicles around here. I don't think a 2-hour time limit or overnight parking permit thing would solve anybody's grievances or inconveniences. I think it would just annoy people more. So I just wanted to voice that I am not in favor of any parking pass plan. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll bring it back then to the council for discussion. Mr. Harding.
So I'm just considering the 3 options that Mr. Jones talked about. We could vote against the implied motion, we could vote for the implied motion, or we could continue it. I don't think I'm ready to vote against the motion. I think this has been, a lot of effort has gone into this, and it has been very disjointed throughout the process. And I don't think I'm ready to vote for it either. which I guess, does that leave continuing? But I do have to say, and be interested in anyone else who participate in these discussions, chiming in their impressions. But I do have to say, we have had, for many years, we've had discussions about zoning laws and about occupancy and about enforcement of occupancy zoning laws. And there's been times where there's been requests to change the occupancy zoning laws. We've had requests to just not, to make it the city policy not to enforce zoning laws. Part of that discussion of the people who were fighting against the enforcement, and they were saying, in part, it's our own enforcement saying that this is very difficult to do, and the people who are enforced on, when they look around, and there's others that are not being forced on, feeling targeted or whatever, and they said, well, if we have these zoning occupancy laws, to avoid certain conditions like noise complaints or parking difficulties, then let's enforce the symptoms, and so that was very much a request by the people who were fighting against zoning enforcement. That was a suggestion that was made by our at the time community development, and so we had residents who were looking to work with the city and were following the advice of the city, who have done what the city asked them to do, and now it seems like everyone else has now kind of moved the goalpost and reframed the discussion that now, well, if the problem is over occupancy, don't enforce parking, you should enforce the over occupancy problem. And so it's anyway, I do feel like before we either move forward with it or dismiss it, I do think it would be helpful to maybe revisit some of these discussions from a couple of years ago. And perhaps the conditions have changed sufficiently, but when I hear 92% utilization across a whole section, to me that sounds like there's a handful of spots somewhere along that very long street or that section of street. And I do think there's some livability questions here that we may want to address. And so anyway, those are my thoughts as I'm being asked to vote on this implied motion. Mr. Henley, I think you're muted.
There we go. It's like, why isn't he responding to me? Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Sorry, I am here. Just didn't hear you. And some of what my thoughts were, I think Mr. Harding kind of talked through. So hopefully this isn't redundant, but I'm having a hard time kind of thinking through supporting this. And I guess the issue is if it's a parking issue, then we still have capacity. If it's an occupancy issue, I think if we gave these households 1 to 2 permits, we're not going to change their occupancy, because if they've got 2 or 3 off-street, locations plus 1 to 2 permits that they can buy, they're going to, if they're overoccupied, they're going to stay overoccupied. I don't know that I guess I'm not convinced, I'm not persuaded that it solves the occupancy issue. And then if it's a safety issue, which we've talked about a little bit, we've talked about how there are other things we might need to address on this road from a safety standpoint. So I guess I'm not persuaded that it's solving, the parking, occupancy, or safety. And so I would welcome further discussions about this road and about this area. from an occupancy perspective or from a safety perspective, but I guess I'm not convinced that I can support it tonight. I'm not persuaded that it accomplishes any one of those three goals.
Mr. Fillmore.
I am largely in agreement with both Daves. I think this needs to be continued. I think it merits further discussion and study. And frankly, I'm a bit confused. It's one of our speakers, one of the local residents, indicate that the department director urged them to pursue this permit program. Yet now we have the staff saying that they're recommending against it. I don't know where the disconnect is there, but I think that merits further discussion. We have laws in place, and I'm troubled by the fact that they're not really being enforced. I think we've got to dig into that a little bit and figure out, is there some unique problem in enforcing speed limits or 72 hours or anything else in that regard? Javin mentioned that they were going to be considering speed bumps to slow speed down to 25 miles an hour. I would welcome that consideration in a report. Maybe a parking permit program is our last resort. I don't know, but I just think this merits more discussion. I'm also a bit troubled by the fact that one of the early speakers, the woman who seemed to be perhaps in the lead on this effort, indicates that she feels like she's never really been heard, that her group really hasn't had an appropriate audience with this particular department in city government. And I think we owe them that, if in fact that has not happened.
Ms. Ellsworth. Ms. Ellsworth, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. A citizen texted me and said that they couldn't call in, and they asked me to read their text. Is that appropriate?
Is there a judgment from staff on that?
That'd be fine.
Okay, well, I'll read this person's text. This is their words. It says, "Hi, Shannon. This is Lee McCready. I'd like to comment on the Slate Canyon parking issue. I like your proposal. Sounds like the motion is a solution looking for a problem. There is no problem with safety. There is no problem with capacity. There is no problem with eyesores. It's just a bunch of, or maybe only one, Karens complaining because they have no bigger problems than to make problems for other people." End quote. Anyways, I'm sorry. There's a couple of citizens that didn't get the chance to call in, or they didn't know about this ahead of time. There was one woman who was really distraught. I talked to her for a half hour this morning, and she's not comfortable using technology, but she got a hold of 311, and they sent me a message, and then I called her. And she's really concerned. She lives on Slate Canyon Drive, and she has 3 children who are autistic. She's a single mom, and she's really opposed to this parking permit program. She feels like it would financially impact her, and it would not be a net positive for safety. So there's a lot of different comments. That being said, these are my personal opinions now. I know that citizens are really frustrated about parking on Slate Canyon Drive, about illegal parking. Folks can usually find a place to park. That's what the report indicates. Sometimes folks do park illegally in front of their neighbor's driveway. That's super frustrating. As you guys know, I live here. I live about 100 yards from Slate Canyon Drive. And I notice cars that don't move for sometimes weeks and sometimes months and sometimes years, it feels like. And it's really frustrating for neighbors. And I get that. I feel that. However, there's no consensus on the problem, and there's no consensus on the solution. There have been many, many, many meetings to get citizens involved. One of the callers referenced a meeting at Spring Creek Elementary a year or two ago, over a year ago. I also attended that. Folks generally weren't in favor of it then. Maybe they've changed their minds. I did really want to understand how people on Slate Canyon Drive felt. That's why I went out on, I think it was Saturday night, put flyers on people's doors, just summarizing them and summarizing some of the options and telling them where they can get more information, how they can get their voice heard. So I just feel like I've said, and like you've read in the open city hall comments and in your emails, there is no consensus. There's no consensus on what the problem is. There's no consensus on what the solutions are. I do believe there are two remedies that would solve 90% of our headaches, my headaches and my neighbors' headaches and the citizens of Slate Canyon Drive, and even broader than that, all over South Provo. I think there's two remedies that would really help. One comes from the city and one comes from the citizens. The first remedy would be for the city to enforce on the laws that we have. If the city were really conscientious, if we can allocate the resources on code enforcement and on parking enforcement to kind of clean up Slate Canyon Drive, to cite cars that are illegally parked proactively, to cite any other vehicles that violate code, or any homes with weeds or whatever it is. Let's be proactive about it, and let's implement and activate the laws that we actually already have on the books. It's not, to me, a strong solution to create more complexity when we already have simple laws we just aren't enforcing. The second remedy I see is for me and all my neighbors, and that's to be a good neighbor, to not speed on Slate Canyon Drive, to not park in front of our neighbors' driveways, to not run over their dogs, to not, to not do anything that would violate code, and just to be a great neighbor, let go of prejudices and be neighborly, right? Welcome everyone home to Provo, to South Provo, to Slate Canyon Drive. So those are my recommendations. I would vote against this proposal tonight. If it's continued, that's fine. But yeah, I believe that the remedies I outlined are really the best, strongest things that we can do to alleviate headaches here. And as I've mentioned in previous meetings, speeding is a tremendous issue, and that's something that I will spearhead with the administration.
Mr. McGinn, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, it's come up a few times tonight that that staff worked with the neighbors and asked them to present this exact proposal. And while we have worked with the neighbors in the past, and we've talked about parking permit programs for residential parking can be a tool to deal with overoccupancy. One of the external effects of an overoccupancy often can be an overparking. And so in the right circumstances, yes, a residential parking permit program can be used, and it will, while you're dealing with the parking problems that are there, you'll deal with the occupancy. And those tend to be, and that's used quite a bit around the country to deal with issues. And you have to be careful about exactly the problem that you're defining and looking at the occupancy to make sure that the program meets it. As the program eventually came to the council and then was referred to staff to look at, it was just along Slate Canyon. And so our response is not a neighborhood-wide occupancy problem or occupancy as applies neighborhood-wide, but it's more specifically along Slate Canyon Drive. And so as we looked at it, and the first approach we try to take is to use the least amount of resources and effort to get the same result. And so as staff, when we did the analysis of the parking, you got to remember, we did that analysis over a year ago and gave our report to the council last December. And so these numbers are from that time. But as we looked at it, we thought that a first step would be to, rather than going to the cost and expense of a parking permit program, would be to try this intermediate step to see if that got the results. And so that's our dealing with occupancy. As staff, we wouldn't tell a neighborhood, you need to come in with an exact proposal, but a parking permit program could accomplish a reduction in occupancy violations while dealing with a parking problem. As for safety and the speed on Slate Canyon, part of the problem is we have a street where the speed limit is 25 miles an hour, but frankly, it's designed for much greater speeds. And so a parking permit program really isn't going to do much about that. There are other solutions that as a city we need to work on with that. Then on the issue of enforcement and proactive enforcement, could we do more proactive enforcement in that of parking in that area for vehicles that are left over 72 hours, those types of things? We could. Now, having said that, one of the aspects that we look at when a parking permit program proposal comes forward is the cost to do it. And to implement a parking permit program or to significantly increase the enforcement of violations along that corridor would require some extra help and would be a budget impact for us. And so when I don't think that we're moving the goalposts, we're just, now that we have a specific proposal and can respond to it and look at what we would need to do, anytime we have a significant increase in parking enforcement, we are at capacity with that enforcement now. And we will need to have additional resources to be able to do that enforcement.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, someone, sorry, another citizen texted me, said they couldn't call in. What do you want to do there, Mr. Chair? Would you want me to have them send an email, or I have them on the phone? I could put them on speakerphone.
I thought it was another text. It's not something to read.
No, they called.
I think maybe just have them email us would be better.
Okay.
I've got a couple of comments I just want to make. Slate Canyon Drive has a lot of similarities with 1450 East. And I think Mr. McGinn put his finger on it. I mean, the big difference is there's not a parking problem on 1450 East, but both of them are designed to be faster streets than the residents would like. And so it's created a lot of safety issues. And I mean, ironically, 1450 East actually doesn't have the parking problems that Slate Canyon Drive does. And so their speeding is even worse. So the parking problems actually slow the traffic down somewhat because the street is narrower than it actually is. And the bike lanes are intended to help with that. But the bottom line is, and I'll be curious to know, Mr. Weaver, what you find out from the engineers, but the engineers have told the residents of 1450 East that they can't put speed bumps on a road that where the risk of speeding is that high, it actually creates other kinds of safety issues. So they may be looking at other kinds of measures, but that's a longer conversation. But I would just, and I think also, Ms. Peterson has had the unfortunate struggle of, we've had 3 different parking coordinators in the time that she started this process, and I do think maybe because of the length of this process, there's probably a very different set of circumstances than what we started out with. Especially, I don't know how strong the data is, but several people have mentioned the possibility, and I know Gary McGinn's staff had said similar things some time ago, that the rental dwelling license legislation that was created a number of years ago has helped with greater conformity, and so over occupancy may not be as serious a problem as it once was. But I think I concur with the idea that enforcement, I don't feel good about creating a law because other laws aren't being enforced. So I think we really ought to explore what it would take to make sure that occupancy laws are enforced, parking laws are enforced, and speeding laws are enforced, and maybe at that point figure out where if more is necessary. So I'm certainly not inclined to give it the thumbs up at this point. I think if others feel strongly that they want to continue this and have further discussion, that's fine. But I just feel like there's very little consensus on the nature of the problem, as has already been commented. So it feels like we need more discussion and more participation and a greater sense of having been heard, so that whatever is decided, it will not be as divisive. Because right now it feels like it's a formula for failure, no matter which way we turn. Ms. Ellsworth?
Yes, I apologize to be disjointed, but there was a citizen who called in. They tried to raise their hand and they weren't called on. So they asked me to read their text. It says this: we live on Slate Canyon Drive and believe parking should be enforced. If they aren't being enforced now, why should we have to pay for a parking permit? I'd be much more comfortable with our efforts going towards slowing down drivers on the road.
Hogan.
Hopefully y'all can hear me all right. Looks like I have some bandwidth issues. Thank you. So I guess the realist in me, when I went to BYU the second time around to get started on my master's, I would go and pull into BYU. I didn't have a parking permit, and all the parking was so far away, and I was always running.
We're having trouble hearing you.
So I would just go to the 1 hour parking, which was free for an hour, and then I would just leave classes and go move my car every hour. It started off, I would just erase the chalk that they put on there. I'll call in.
Well, it got better there toward the end, but I don't know if you're okay. Mr. Harding, we'll see if he wants to try a different method.
Thank you. I think this is a good discussion. Just wrote down a couple notes. I've heard a couple times from Mr. McGinn that their enforcement resources are kind of at a limit. So if we want to increase parking enforcement in any one place, we either need to increase the resources for parking enforcement, or we need to find another place where we can cut back. And I think that's a very important thing that we need to understand. One nice thing about paid on-street parking, be it kind of an hourly pay or a permit, is if it's priced right, it can pay for the enforcement. And so we don't have to pull from general fund money, taxpayer money, in order to enforce. And so when we call for greater enforcement, we need to understand that it has to be paid for somehow, whether that's one of those three options. I am hopeful that as we look at programs throughout the city or whatever, that we can find a way to pay for enforcement, so we don't have to be pulling from taxpayer money to do that. There's been some discussion about, well, let's just enforce better. Let's enforce the laws that we already have. Let's see. Two thoughts on that. One is, not all laws are created equal, or not all laws are equally enforceable or easy to enforce. We've heard a lot about over-occupancy as one of the more difficult things to enforce on, and I don't think that necessarily means that we should do away with occupancy laws, but just understand that it is difficult to enforce. Likewise, a 72-hour limit is quite difficult to enforce. You kind of have to, as Councillor Hoban was referring to, you kind of have to chalk a tire and come back 3 days later, and if that chalk hasn't been erased or hasn't been moved, then the vehicle gets the ticket. That's a very inefficient way of enforcing. Now, if we were just saying, well, let's enforce the laws that are already on the books, one of those laws is that that every car that is operated from a property should have an off-street parking stall. So one way to easily enforce that law that already exists would to put in some sort of no overnight parking. Whether that's from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. or midnight to 6 a.m. or whatever, but that would be a very easy law to enforce, or a very easy way to enforce the law that every vehicle that's operated from a property should have an off-street parking stall. Now that can be done in conjunction with a parking permit program. And so people who want to park on the street could have access to a permit. It has been brought up, if you then turn around and allow every residents of every unit to buy 1 or 2 permits, that might completely undo, because there's not much parking between driveways and the density of the housing along that area. So you have to figure out a way to limit the number of permits that are offered. Another option would just be to require payment, between those hours overnight. So, for example, just throwing an idea out there that it might cost $1 to park on the street overnight. Anyway, the idea is there's so many different options you can tailor on-street parking in so many different ways. But something like that, so there would be no restrictions during the day. So if people had visitors, there wouldn't be any problems with that. If someone has an autistic child who receives services throughout the day, no impact on that. But now there is a financial incentive, as Councilor Aylesworth has mentioned, to clean out that garage and make sure that there's that a car can park there, so that you don't have to pay that $1 a night to park out on the street. Anyway, there are a lot of ways to enforce the laws that already exist, but sometimes how you approach that will affect the ease of enforcement. And then a final thought is just, we're talking about the different laws that already exist. There's been some discussion of the number of RDLs, and it might be interesting to see if community and neighborhood services have an estimate. Do they try to estimate what is the compliance with RDLs in various parts of the city? So since we're talking about Slate Canyon, I'm sure we know how many RDLs exist in that area, but do we feel like that's 100%, that every rental has an RDL? Do we feel that that's 50%? That might be a good number to have, as well as a law that's on the books that is the acknowledgement and disclosure law, and what kind of compliance rates do we feel like we have? Anyway, just that there are these laws that already exist, and it'd be good to know if we have a plan to enforce those. How what are some good ways to do that, and how do we plan to go about doing that? So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Okay, Mr. Hoban.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. My whole point in the BYU story was just say that people will go out of their way to do musical cars. So I really don't think a 72-hour ban or enforcing the 70 hours is going to do anything. People are just going to move their car. They're going to move it, 20 feet to another spot every couple days, and it's just going to be musical cars. So I don't really see that doing anything. I also don't see the 2-hour parking during the day as doing a whole lot. I'm not trying to criticize staff. I know they're just trying to come up with any idea that doesn't cost a lot of money. But frankly, if the issue is people parking, if the highest parking occupancy was at night, I just don't see a 2-hour, 2-hour ban or a 2-hour limit during the day as doing a whole lot when most of the people are gone. So I guess I wouldn't support staff's proposal. I just don't see it as being effective. I like some of Mr. Harding's ideas about overnight. So when I lived in Minnesota, there were 4 of us living in a house, and we only had 1 garage spot, and we crammed our cars in because we weren't allowed to park on the street. We left our keys on the counter, and in the morning, everybody moved the cars out of the way, and we all made our way back out to work. And we just made it work because we had to. And I think people will get creative. They'll clean out their garages. They'll cram their cars in their driveway, and they'll get off the street if they know they're going to get booted or towed. So I know that that's an inconvenience for a lot of people, but frankly, it's an inconvenience for a lot of people to have, no parking available when they have guests come over, or no parking available, when they have, or have a car parked in their driveway, or whatever these other inconveniences that people are complaining about. So I think the other thing is, how do you, if this is an occupancy issue, how are you going to enforce occupancy? I mean, the reality is, what are you going to have the police go show up on somebody's door and say, show me your licenses, show me your proof of residency? I just don't see that happening. If I were illegally occupying a home, with 4 or 5 people in a home that's only supposed to have 3, somebody came to my door from zoning and said, do you have more than 3 people living here that are unrelated or whatever? I just say, nope. I just don't see that there's any practical way to really enforce occupancy. And so I just, to me, a lot of the stuff we're throwing out there just isn't practical. You're not going to enforce that. You're not going to enforce the 72-hour thing. People are just going to move their cars. You're not going to reduce the number of cars there. I guess also, I've lived in several big cities and some medium-sized cities, and I just think at some point cities just kind of have to grow up a little bit and start realizing that where there is over occupancy or over parking, you just start having parking permit programs. I'm not trying to be insensitive to the people that are going to have to pay for those. I've done it in my lifetime, and you just find a way to get to get $30 a month or $50 a month or whatever to pay for the parking pass. So I'm not trying to be insensitive to, money's tight and these are inconveniences, but at the same time, I just don't see any practical ways to just say, we're just going to start enforcing things and it's going to solve everything. I think something has to happen. I think there needs to be some sort of program, limit on parking overnight, something like that, before there's going to be any impact, whether it be Slate Canyon or elsewhere where we're having parking issues. And it just seems like it's the reality to me. And I also disagree that doing something about parking isn't going to do anything about over occupancy. I think long term, it might not have an immediate impact, but I do think long term, there are a lot of examples where you focus on the symptoms sometimes, and you do have an impact on the root, even if you're not directly addressing the root cause. We've all heard of the examples of, like, if you fix a broken window, there's likely to be less vandalism at that house over time, because you've done one simple thing. Or if you remove graffiti, you're likely to get less graffiti. Or if you get rid of panhandlers in a certain area, you're going to see other crimes go down. I disagree that if we do something about parking, it's not going to do anything else for the area. And if this is a serious community issue where people are constantly angry, mad about each other, I'm sorry, but one of our responsibilities is quality of life, helping with the quality of life. And so I think we got to do something. I don't know what that is, but I don't think the staff's recommendation is going to work. And so I'm okay continuing. I'm just saying at some point we got to do something. I don't think the staff recommendation is going to work, and I don't think just saying we're going to enforce the existing laws is going to work either. So we need something else, in my opinion.
Mrs. Ellsworth?
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to continue it. That's fine. I would just encourage my 6 fellow council members to listen to and to read the comments of people who live on Slate Canyon Drive. This is not a panacea for all that ails us. It's just not. It's not going to reduce housing prices. If it was, then shoot, we should implement this across the city and in every city in the valley and all over. This is not a panacea. But I would just encourage you to listen to the people who live on Slate Canyon Drive. Talk to them, call them, email them, read their emails, read their comments from Open City Hall. Pay attention to the people who live there. That's important. This is their quality of life. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, so it seems like this is, this is a situation where if any one council member desires to consider this item again, I feel like I've heard several people say that. Am I correct in that?
No, that's not the case, Mr. Chair. This isn't a planning commission item, so that rule doesn't apply. If someone wants to continue, they need to make a motion to do so. It needs to be seconded and then voted on by approved by the majority of the council.
All right, I apologize. That's what it says in your notes. All right, does anybody desire to have this item continued?
Yes, I will so move and urge that we, in the interim, that we get more staff study and input.
Is there a second?
I would second that.
Mr. Shipley, discussion. Mr. Harding, did you? Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I just want to be clear for staff's sake. What data are you looking for from staff?
I don't have a particular date in mind. Just,
data.
Whenever the staff gets to the point where they feel like they've heard these people out and they've studied alternatives and have some new recommendations to make. That could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months.
Well, Mr. Fillmore, Councilor Ellsworth is asking what data, not date, what data you're looking for, because what I've heard is that staff's already done everything that you just asked for. So unless you're just saying, we don't like the recommendations you gave, bring us new ones, just keep coming back until you bring us recommendations we like. I'm not sure I don't think they know what they're being asked to do.
I think that's a fair question. One thing that has been indicated earlier by Javin is that they were going to take a look at the speed bump possibility. I for one, don't think that, I don't think, the comment was made earlier that someone did not think that the parking problem on the streets translated to a safety problem, but it does. It does because it obscures vision as you're pulling out of your driveway and other situations. I just think and I'd like to take a creative look at a variety of things we could do to slow traffic down on Slate Canyon. It is a hazard. I don't think I've ever stood on a sidewalk there in that neighborhood and seen a car driving less than 35. And I've seen a good many at 50 plus.
So that raises...
There are a lot of little children there.
So I think that's a very valid point. It raises a little bit of a separation of powers issue and a procedural question about what it is you're being asked to consider. The question before you, generally speaking, isn't, or the question that was brought to you is not, as a council, solve traffic safety and parking congestion on Slate Canyon Drive. You have, as a council, you have administrative oversight to review the actions of the administration and to give them input about if you think that they are not, in fact, fulfilling their role in an administrative setting. And so you certainly have the ability to say, well, the question that was brought to us wasn't that general policy question, but we're going to take it up now, and we're going to engage in some administrative oversight and want the administration to come to us and explain to us how they're going to solve the problem on Slate Canyon Drive, and we'll give them feedback about whether that's a good solution or not. But in the immediate time frame right now, what you've been asked to do is consider legislation. And the legislation you've been asked to consider is whether to implement a parking permit program on Slate Canyon Drive. So I think you've got a little bit of I'm hearing kind of conflicting statements from the different counselors. And I think you need to maybe clarify what the question is that you want to answer. If you want to continue the item that's on the agenda, the item that you are continuing is the consideration of passing legislation to create a permit parking program on Slate Canyon Drive. If that is a solution that you are interested in exploring further, then a continuance would be appropriate. If you're not actually interested in considering that solution, I believe that the appropriate action tonight would be to vote on the implied motion, to disapprove it, and then to ask for the administration to come back and make a presentation to you about your policy concerns about traffic and parking on Slate Canyon Drive.
Okay. Brian, that's a very helpful clarification. Thank you. And you're right as to the matter that's before us tonight. My primary concern, as I indicated at the outset, is safety along that street. And so I would welcome a larger discussion with the administration on those considerations. With respect to the parking permit, I guess my primary concern, and the reason I thought it ought to be continued, is the sense we get from some of these neighbors that they really, they feel like they've been kind of misled, I guess. They were urged to come up with a parking permit program, and then the staff said, no, we don't like that. I want them to have the sense that they've been heard. And even if we end up with concluding that a parking permit program is either inappropriate or premature, that's one thing, but I just want them to feel like they were heard.
Councilor Fillmore?
Go ahead.
In talking with Public Works, they said that they would be able to have more information come the following work session to further discuss the safety of Slate Canyon Drive in 2 weeks.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you, Chapman.
Mr. Strachan has a comment.
So I simply wanted to point out that I believe that we have a 90-day window. And if you wanted further action, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if you probably could table it today and bring it back in 2 or 4 weeks and still make within the 90-day window that's within our processes.
Well, and I guess I would say, I think you've already met the timeline on the process, which is that the process is that you needed within 90 days to have a public hearing on a resolution to a resolution of intent stating you have an intent to create a parking permit program. I think you've met that step. So at this point, I don't think there is another time deadline step that you need to meet until you pass this resolution. So you can move this to work session. You can move this offline to a committee. I think you can do anything you want until such point as a majority of the council wants to actually approve this resolution, at which point you vote on it in an evening meeting and take the next step of then having another public hearing within 90 days to actually vote on the ordinance. But at this point, I don't think you even need to have another public hearing on the resolution of intent.
Okay, so council could table it or move it somewhere else temporarily, or they could vote on it and either approve it or vote on it and defeat it.
Correct.
Okay.
And at present, we have a motion to continue this. I see 3 hands. It's not late at night, but we've been on this item for quite a while. So let me just ask if these comments can help us address this. Is there any discussion of the continuance?
And does it have a second?
It did get a second, Mr. Shipley.
And let me speak to that. I guess to clarify that, what I understood Councillor Harding saying and what I understood Councilor Hoban saying was that they're not comfortable supporting this in its current format, but that maybe the parking permit program is the right answer still. So I guess what I'm supporting is the idea that we, again, continue this discussion, and whether or not that's in a work session or a committee, I would continue this. I wouldn't vote, for it tonight, and I don't think we're ready to vote completely against it either and be done with it.
So from a procedural standpoint, it may be that the most appropriate thing is to have a motion to postpone indefinitely, which just sets the matter aside until two council members come back to council leadership and say, we're now satisfied that this ought to be on the agenda again. And that could be in a work session or in an evening meeting.
I like that.
Yeah, I will so amend my motion.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Mr. Harding.
I was just going to say that, particularly if we're going to be hearing from Public Works on this stretch of road, I also think it would be valuable to hear from the applicant, the original applicant, during a work meeting, so we can have a discussion about what has led us to this point.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I would just say that a couple of issues are getting convoluted here. Occupancy is a separate issue from parking. Parking is a separate issue from speeding. So regardless of what happens tonight, I intend to have conversations with Public Works and the administration to find some solutions to resolve speeding on this road. It doesn't matter if there's a parking permit or not. There has got to be changes that address speeding on Slate Canyon Drive. It's at least 1.5 miles. There's no cross traffic. There's no stop sign. There's no speed bump. It's a racetrack. And we've got to find solutions on that, regardless of what happens with parking. And as the staff report mentions, staff doesn't think that a parking permit program is necessary. It also says that the only current mechanism of traffic calming is the consistent parking at the top of Slate Canyon Drive.
Mr. Sewell. It looks like you're muted.
Thank you. May I defer to Wayne Parker first before I make my comment?
Okay. Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just been communicating with Dave Decker. As council may recall, you asked us during the discussion on broader transportation issues a few weeks ago to address some specific safety concerns, one of which was speeds and the design of Slate Canyon Drive. Public Works and Engineering are planning to come to your work meeting in 2 weeks with some analysis and data and some opportunities to maybe restructure Slate Canyon Drive in some fashion. So again, my suggestion was going to be, if you're going to continue at some point the parking discussion, it might be well to make sure that you've had that discussion with Public Works about the infrastructure design before you reach a conclusion on parking regulation. So just wanted to mention that that was in the wings and scheduled for a work meeting in 2 weeks.
Good.
Mr. Sewell.
Thank you. That sounds great, Mr. Parker. I had a couple of quick questions, one for Councilor Ellsworth and then one for Mr. McGinn, if he's still here, and then just a couple of brief comments. Councilor Ellsworth, you mentioned that you felt like there was some room for improvement on enforcement along Slate Canyon Drive that could improve things. Could you just kind of roughly quantify what you think that is? I mean, is it mostly vehicles that aren't moving in 72 hours? Are we talking 1 or 2 vehicles or a dozen? Just kind of roughly sketch that out, if you would, please.
Yeah. So there's 3 or 4 vehicles that come to mind that are obvious to me, and I don't keep track. I don't mark tires. I don't take notes. But just in the 5 years I've lived here, you just notice what's always there eventually. And there's probably 4 vehicles that are parked for 6 months at a time. There's one boat that's there like all summer, and then it'll move once or twice in the summer, but it's there for probably 8 months. there's a certain van, there's a certain SUV, there's a certain something else, and they don't move. Folks have called 311. It doesn't seem to be changing. There's another. Is that what you're asking, Mr.
Yes.
Sewell? Okay.
Yes.
There's probably, I don't know, 3-ish driveways where there's cars that seem to be broken down, right? The tires are like totally flat, or they're like completely parked there because they have like blocks and stuff under the tires. People aren't driving them. And I don't know if that's against our code or not. I couldn't tell you. But there's probably 3 or 4 of those. Trying to think what else. There's just in terms of anecdotes and trends, I've said this before, if you come by on a summer afternoon, summer morning, on a Saturday, and folks have their garage doors open, you can see how much they use their garages for attic space. And that's legal, but it definitely pushes cars out of garages and onto the street or in the driveway. And that's very common. I'd say, I don't know, maybe there's 20 homes that are using their garage for one vehicle or for no vehicles when it's a 2-car garage. Another trend is that I live in one of the HOAs, and there's cars from Slate Canyon Drive that park in our open HOA parking stalls. And I think it goes the other way. There's probably a couple of vehicles from my HOA that park out on Slate Canyon Drive. For the most part, it's not. You wouldn't park out on Slate Canyon Drive and walk all the way into my house. That's really inconvenient. And then if it's helpful to know, there is one HOA that seems to be underparked. It's the most recent HOA. And that one is a certain part of it is accessible from your front door to Slate Canyon Drive to park on Slate Canyon Drive and walk into your house. The other 2 HOAs they're not a comfortable place to walk and park on Slate Canyon Drive.
Great, thank you. Yes, that's very helpful. And then if I may, just a quick question to Mr. McGinn. Is he still with us?
Yes.
Oh, great. So my question is, hearing that overview of the problems that Councilor Ellsworth perceives with enforcement along there, did I hear you right, or did you say that you feel like you don't have the resources right now to proactively address those, or could you comment on that?
Sure. Right now, we do go down Slate Canyon routinely, but it's not every day, and it's not several times a day. But we have all of Provo City where we're doing enforcement. If there's a hot spot, like Slate Canyon, we can up the enforcement on it. But without additional resources, we will have to cut back in other areas. And so it's just a balancing act. We don't have enough resources to be on every street a couple of times a day. And with vehicles that are there longer than 72 hours, things like that, often it depends on, or to do enforcement of it. If we drive by one person drives by every, once a week or something like that, they don't know whether that vehicle's been there for 72 hours or not, if that's a problem or it's routinely moving. Now, sometimes we can tell if a car's up on blocks or something like that, then yes, we can take a look at it. But we certainly will go to Slate Canyon and look at these issues. But to go down several times a day on Slate Canyon and to keep up the level of service that we have in other areas of the city, that would require more resources. Think of it like the police department. If they hear speeding on a particular road is a problem, and they send traffic officers out there to routinely patrol that over several weeks' time, that means with the limited number of traffic officers we have, there are other areas in the city where we're not doing enforcement with traffic officers. And so it's a very similar thing. So if we do have a residential permit, which in the right circumstances, a residential permit can help with a parking problem and have the added benefit of helping with occupancy. If we are to take on a new residential permit, we definitely will need more help. And that help will have to come either from the general fund budget, or the permit system will have to pay for itself.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So if I may, I just have a few comments. I feel like we do have a resource problem, as Mr. McGinn has indicated. So that's something I'd like to look at as a separate issue. As several of my colleagues have expressed, I also feel like I don't feel like this is quite the right solution, so I'm not ready to vote for this, but I'm also not ready to vote against it because it does seem like there are some significant problems, and maybe we just haven't found the right solution. I agree with Mr. Hoban that starting with the daytime solution doesn't seem to solve the biggest problems, which are at nighttime. So I'm supportive of tabling this and bringing this back in the next month or two to explore some other possible solutions.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. Just a couple additional observations. I think the example of the cars that are obvious violations of the 72-hour, and I think we heard earlier that some of the enforcement is done by complaints. But I think it's just illustrates that the absence of complaints or the small number of complaints doesn't necessarily indicate a level of compliance. I think there are times where residents either don't want to go through the hassle of complaining, or they don't want to be a bad neighbor and complain, or they've complained in the past and haven't seen it make a difference. And so there's times where they just give up. And the other observation I wanted to make is it sounds like our engineering department is putting a lot of thought and effort into considering options to address the speeding problems on this street. And I think that's great. We should also just be aware that there are many other streets in the city where residents complain of speeding. Councilor Handley, I think you mentioned one, 1460 earlier today. And I think we probably all are aware of a handful of streets in our areas, in our districts, or just around that we know of that there are speeding problems. And so whatever we do, I think we need to, be aware that it will probably have it could have more citywide implications if we're going to treat the roads fairly.
All right. So if there's no further discussion of the motion is to continue this item indefinitely. Is that right?
That's right. It needs a second.
I thought it had a second.
It did originally, but then I think the motion changed, so we should confirm with Councilor Shipley that he's still seconding the amended motion.
I would second that, yeah.
Okay. All right, so with no further discussion, I will call for a vote, and I will vote yes. Mr. Harding?
Yes.
Ms. Ellsworth? Ms. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we can continue it.
Mr. Fillmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hoban,
Yes.
Mr. Sewell,
Yes.
and Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
Ms. Ellsworth, do you have a question?
I just have a comment. If there's any way to target feedback from people who live on Slate Canyon Drive or on the kind of intersecting roads, that would be extremely helpful. I appreciate everyone who cares about these issues. I know that they're frustrating beyond Slate Canyon Drive, but for something this targeted, I really hope that we can kind of focus and hone in on the, how this will impact the folks who live right there.
Okay. If there is no objection, then we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting and reconvene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo by unanimous consent. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate you stepping in to help on that last item. I'll get trained this week to handle those nuances of the public input, but that was nice of you to handle that difficult item for me. So, all right, so we are just getting my agenda in the right place. We are up to agenda item number 4 for the Redevelopment Agency, which is a call for nominations for the RDA chair for 2021. And I am pleased to nominate Councilor Shannon Ellsworth for that leadership position. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. Mr. Harding?
Enthusiastic, yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Hanley?
yes.
Mr. Hoban?
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore?
Yes.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Yes, and thank you.
And I will vote yes, and thank you for stepping up to serve in that position. Next item on the agenda is item number 5, which is a resolution. Oh, sorry. Let's finish this. We have also a vice chair that we need to nominate and vote on. So I'll call for nominations for the position of vice chair in RDA leadership.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Bill Fillmore.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I will call for a vote on the implied motion to elect Mr. Fillmore to that position. Mr. Harding?
Enthusiastic, yes.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore?
Yes.
Mr. Hanley?
Yes.
Mr. Hoban?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes, and thank you, Bill.
And I will vote yes, and thank you, Bill, also. Now we'll move on to item number 5, which is a resolution acknowledging the election of the chair and vice chair of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo for the year 2021. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore?
Yes.
Mr. Hanley?
Yes.
Mr. Hoban?
Yes.
Mr. Harding?
Yes.
And I will vote yes, making the voting unanimous. And at this point, I will turn the gavel over to Councilor Ellsworth And if I'm not mistaken, I believe of course, you're welcome to give a speech if you like, but I believe your only official duty at this point would be to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Do we need a motion to adjourn? Or is there an implied motion?
You can ask if there's no objections, and then just adjourn by unanimous consent.
Okay. If there is no objection, then we adjourn this meeting of the RDA by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good job.
Good night. God bless.